For Americans, cars seem to be a never-ending nightmare. They're expensive, they pollute, and they even kill, of course. But beyond general disappointments, cars are doing something far worse. They're creating sprawl. Cars are rapidly propelling cities outward and spreading the population thin so that our cities eventually become one widespread, never-ending, mangled mess and shape. They have been the bullet fired from the gun of disregard for conservation and practicality that has defined American urban planning for decades. But why do our cities look the shapes that they do now? Why do they look this way? Well, city planning and infrastructure is a pretty special topic, so I think the best way to get this point across is visually. Let's look at a city in Europe, for example. The largest European cities were founded and developed hundreds of years before those in the U.S., hundreds of years before cars and buses and trains existed. This meant that cities were developed to give the walker the convenience of a hub and spoke or grid system to get around more effectively. Now let's look at a comparable U.S. city, population-wise, let's say Chicago. It's a city founded in the 1800s that grew during the Industrial Revolution and suburbanized with the rest of America later on. If you look at American cities' downtown areas, you'll most likely see a grid system as well, because these were the first planned parts of cities where everyone lived and worked. It was this convenient layout that welcomed networks like the New York City subway and San Francisco cable car system to booming cities. These systems didn't have to go as far as they do now. Now add a car to this whole equation. If that typical city dweller who took the trolley or simply walked to work wanted to venture beyond their urban habitat for a weekend getaway, they could do so on a budget. They could do it pretty easily. Families had the freedom to vacation very inexpensively and could travel for hundreds of miles each day while doing so. They could live in neighborhoods away from the hustle and bustle of their big, loud cities and drive into work every day from somewhere else. After everyone had acquired a car by the middle of the 20th century, America suburbanized. New neighborhoods and subdivisions popped up far away from business centers because people now had the freedom to live or to not live in the crowded city centers. To connect all of these neighborhoods to one another, to the new business centers naturally being created, we had to build new roads. And they winded all around, and along these roads we built more neighborhoods and more subdivisions. Beltways built for car travelers wanted to bypass the city's general traffic served as a geographical border for major cities, and so more homes were constructed either alongside or even beyond them, farther and farther and farther away from the city center, meaning people had to drive farther and farther and farther to do some of the things they do on a regular basis, including going to work. The efficiency of our dense cities was lost as millions migrated to the suburbs. Now skip ahead to the year 2020 as opposed to the 1950s. 5 billion people of the world population will be living in cities in the next 10 years, and a lot of that growth is happening right here in the United States. An estimated 10 million more Americans will be living in cities by 2030 than currently are. Still, that's 86% of the country's population will be living in urban or suburban areas. Given our current developmental practices, our cities are in for a rough ride. Those millions of people joining mass metro areas will most likely end up in the suburbs, where that freedom of car is the only way to get around. More people stemming out into and from the suburbs means less high-density expansion, meaning that the more we continue to build out without building up, means that we'll only keep building out and taking up land. That puts a lot of stress on cities. Congestion is only going to get worse. Mobility is going to be even more of an everyday struggle as a result. Utilities like water and electricity will have to become more extensive in physical size, which becomes more expensive to build and maintain and really inconvenient if lines break. Massive metro areas like Phoenix expand and expand without definite borders. Beltways and surrounding subdivisions encircle city centers like rings in a tree trunk. Human development stretches on for miles and miles that can be seen from space practically, and the reason that suburban metropolises flourish is because of their dependence on cars. In a more foreign term, lack of mass transportation options. For one moment, let's put Phoenix up against another place. Let's compare Phoenix to somewhere of comparable size, let's say the San Francisco Bay Area. Both places grew considerably in the 19th century, but certainly experienced the suburbanization of the 1950s onward. Here's the difference about these two places, though. The Phoenix Metro takes up 15,000 square miles of land, while the Bay Area itself only takes up less than 2,500 square miles. How did these cities get to be so different if they're so alike then? If they're so alike in population, how do they get to be so massive? Well, Phoenix's transit system, the Valley Metro Transit, was founded 20 years later than the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, or the BART. Additionally, the BART was ranked as the third best rapid transit system in the nation by Business Insider, as well as the 11th cheapest. While the Valley Metro didn't place in the top 50 for quality of transit systems, and Phoenix is considered the third most expensive to get around. The slam dunk? San Francisco's density has increased over the last 10 years significantly, while increases in mobility for people, however, they get around, namely by walking and transit. When comparing two similar U.S. cities, it's easy to see that the one with the longer-lasting, nationally ranked mass transit system resulted in the use of over 80% less than the alternative. There's a legitimate relationship between quality, mobility, and conservation. The solution here is mass transit. Communal transportation is the absolute most efficient existing alternative to cars if ever-growing dense cities and surrounding metro areas want to develop efficiently. It is undeniable that while in the numerous way that cars continue to fail humans, mass transit prevails. But despite facts like the U.S. gives off over half of the world's car emissions, or that 36,000 American lives were claimed by cars last year, or over 2 million Americans suffered permanent injuries in car crashes, let's look more into the benefits of mass transit. Let's move away from the negatives and let's look on the bright side for a minute. Along these more accessible streets that we'll be creating, businesses are going to prosper because there is a direct correlation, according to studies, between this large-scale community investment and economic growth. For every $10 million in capital investment put into mass transit, a $32 million increase in local business sales has been recorded. And for every $1 billion invested into $1 billion invested into public transportation projects, 50,000 new jobs are created and sustained. 50,000. That's the size of a small city. That's 50,000. But besides economic benefits, mass transit, even with investment far less than that of the San Francisco area, it's user-friendly on a very personal level. People can get their work done as they commute and rarely have to deal with the uncontrollable variables of traffic. If you aren't in the driver's seat, then you aren't as much in harm's way or a candidate for being in an accident on your way both to and from work, statistics show. But in order to improve that quality, we have to move past the cause and effect relationship between low ridership and low quality. Lower ridership affects community awareness, and that affects funding, which puts less people not on trains and buses. But if we break that cycle, if we can just get into the community's routine of going to work on a bus or a train, then transit systems can get the money they need, be it from revenue or increased public investment, to improve the quality. Now, notice that I've categorized the solution as this car problem as mass transit. Mass transit, not public transit. That's typically what we hear when talking about this issue. Mass transit. The reason I say this is because in the case of most sprawling mid-sized American cities where we need to tackle this issue, or we're seeing this issue, I don't believe that local governments have the means to take it on right now. And I don't think they have the right to essentially nationalize an industry. We need to take this message to where the money is, to the companies who already have launched major technology-based, environmentally driven innovation projects. Companies like Amazon, whose customer base stretches across the entire nation, has billions of dollars to put into new ventures, and who are willing to execute this sort of transportation reformation. If these companies value the future, they'll hop on board. And I'm not a pessimistic person. I'm pragmatic. I'm not drawn to talk to you about this issue because I'm a prominent environmental activist, although I very much am aware of global warming. And it's certainly not because I want to explain to you how to spend your money. It's because this starts on a grassroots level. I want our cities to be more sustainable for the future, and I want us to cut down on some of our wants to fulfill some of our more important needs. This is an issue of not only basic conservation and planning, but of efficiency. It is the reality that we can shape our cities with mass transit in the practical way that we want, with higher density and less sprawl. And at the same time, we can cut down on emissions and maybe save some lives. The great thing about this alternative is that we know what to do. We know how to implement it. We, for the most part, know how to make it sustainable, and we know all of its facets. But now it's time to convince our communities, big and small, that it's the viable alternative. Do your own research on this topic, because there is so much that I didn't mention in this presentation today. Lobby your city governments about the importance of these systems and have them apply for state and federal grants to either improve, extend, or totally revamp their local public transit. We can take society and make this work with the right motivation for building and keeping efficiency. If we can give up a bit of our independence made possible by cars for our commute to work and school every day, maybe we can save money that we don't spend on constantly refueling gas tanks for monotonous city driving. Maybe we can cut down on emissions like we've never seen before. Maybe we can Maybe we can keep that only half century of oil left around for a bit longer than what has been projected. Adopting mass transportation as our primary or even a dramatically close secondary mode of transportation in cities is how we solve many large issues that we face today, including the climate crisis. And in time is how we will correct the shapes of our cities to become far more efficient. Thank you.